January 3rd, 2026, 2 a.m. Caracas, Venezuela. Nicolas Maduro is asleep in his bed next to his wife Cilia Flores. They are inside what Donald Trump would later describe as a fortress of solid steel. Armed guards patrol outside, security cameras cover every angle, electronic surveillance systems monitor every approach. This is the most protected residence in Venezuela, designed specifically to prevent exactly what is about to happen. But at 2 a.m., 7 massive explosions shatter the night. U.S. helicopters sweep low over the capital. Fort Tiuna, Venezuela's largest military complex, erupts in flames. La Carlota Air Base is hit. Anti-aircraft systems that should be firing remain silent. Radar stations that should be tracking the American aircraft somehow see nothing. Communication networks that should be alerting the military command mysteriously go dark. And then, U.S. Delta Force commandos walk through Maduro's fortress defenses like they own the place. No firefight, no desperate last stand, just handcuffs, a helicopter, and a one-way flight to the USS Iwo Jima waiting offshore. Within hours, the president of Venezuela is aboard an American warship heading to a courtroom in New York. How does the most wanted man in Latin America, protected by an entire military apparatus, get dragged from his bedroom without a single American casualty? The answer that nobody wants to say out loud: someone inside gave him up. This wasn't a military operation. This was a negotiated betrayal. Today on the Static Dispatch, we expose the inside job that ended Venezuela's sovereignty. How Maduro's own generals sold him to Washington for $50 million. How the Cartel of the Suns, a drug trafficking organization run by Venezuelan military officers, imploded from within, and how Trump's real target was never drugs, but the 303 billion barrels of oil beneath Venezuelan soil. The story begins not in 2026, but in the 1990s, when Venezuela's military transformed from a national defense force into the world's most powerful drug cartel. They called it El Cartel de los Soles, the Cartel of the Suns. The name comes from the sun-shaped stars worn on Venezuelan generals' uniforms. This wasn't a cartel led by criminals from the streets. This was a cartel headquartered in military bases, run by men with access to state resources, protected by government immunity, and backed by national armed forces. For decades, the Cartel of the Suns operated with impunity. Venezuelan military aircraft transported cocaine from Colombian FARC rebels. Naval vessels escorted drug shipments through the Caribbean. Army units provided security for trafficking routes, and the generals got rich, obscenely, corruptingly rich, while ordinary Venezuelans starved under Maduro's socialist policies. Military officers were buying mansions in Miami, stashing millions in offshore accounts, and living like narco kings. The United States watched all of this for years. They documented it. They tracked the money. They identified the players. And then in March 2020, the Justice Department dropped a bombshell. They indicted Nicolas Maduro himself on narco-terrorism charges. Not just corruption, not just drug trafficking, narco-terrorism, the same category as Al-Qaeda, ISIS, and the Taliban. Then, Attorney General William Barr didn't mince words. For more than 20 years, Maduro and high-ranking colleagues conspired with Colombian rebels, causing tons of cocaine to enter and devastate American communities. The defendants betrayed the Venezuelan people and corrupted Venezuelan institutions to line their pockets with drug money. The indictment came with a $15 million bounty on Maduro's head, but he laughed it off. He was untouchable. He had an army. He had loyal generals. He had Russian and Chinese backing. What could America possibly do? Invade? Start a war over a drug indictment? That seemed absurd. But then something happened that Maduro didn't expect. In 2024, one of his own generals, General Cliver Alcalá Cordones, a high-ranking member of the Cartel of the Suns, stood up in a U.S. courtroom and pleaded guilty. He admitted everything: the cocaine trafficking, the conspiracy, the corruption. And then he named names. He described the network. He identified who controlled which routes, which ports, which military units. Alcalá was sentenced to over 20 years in prison. But more importantly, he became proof that the Cartel of the Suns could be broken. If one general flipped, others might too. And suddenly, that $15 million bounty started looking very different to the remaining generals. By January 2025, the Biden administration increased it to $25 million. By August 2025, Trump raised it to $50 million. $50 million. Think about what that means. A Venezuelan general makes perhaps $10,000 per year in official salary. Even with drug money, even with corruption, $50 million is life-changing wealth. It's escape money. It's immunity money. It's sell out Maduro and live like a king in Florida money. Trump's strategy wasn't subtle. Throughout late 2025, he tightened the noose around Venezuela systematically. In September, U.S. forces began striking suspected drug boats in the Caribbean and Pacific. 115 people killed in 35 operations. Trump didn't hide it. He called it an armed conflict with drug cartels. In November, the U.S. officially designated the Cartel of the Suns as a foreign terrorist organization, putting it in the same category as Al-Qaeda. Then came the blockade. In December, U.S. forces seized 2 fully loaded Venezuelan oil tankers right off Venezuela's coast. A third tanker, the Iran-linked Bella 1, fled from the U.S. Coast Guard, sparking a week-long pursuit. The crew eventually painted a Russian flag on the hull, and Moscow demanded Washington stop trying to seize it. But the message was clear. Venezuela's lifeline, oil exports, was cut off. On December 29th, Trump escalated further. A CIA drone struck a Venezuelan dock facility. This was the first known U.S. land operation inside Venezuela. Not against a drug boat in international waters, not against a ship off the coast. This was a missile fired from the sky into Venezuelan sovereign territory. Maduro went on state television and condemned it as American aggression. He said the U.S. wanted to overthrow his government and steal Venezuela's oil reserves. He was right, but by then it was too late, because while Maduro was giving defiant speeches on television, his own generals were quietly making phone calls to Washington. Trump revealed this later. Maduro tried to negotiate with me. A week ago he called, he said, "We need to talk." I said, "Nope, you have to surrender." Maduro refused, so Trump gave the order, Operation Absolute Resolve. On January 2nd, Delta Force operators boarded helicopters and flew toward Caracas. They waited 4 days for perfect weather conditions. "The weather has to be perfect," Trump explained. "All of a sudden it opened up and we said go." The operation began in the darkest hours of the night. Air, land, and sea assets were coordinated. Venezuelan radar somehow didn't detect the American aircraft. Venezuelan air defense systems somehow didn't fire. Venezuelan military command somehow didn't respond. And when Delta Force reached Maduro's compound, that fortress of solid steel, someone had already opened the doors. 2 sources familiar with the operation told CNN that Maduro and his wife were dragged from their bedroom as they slept. No warning, no negotiation, just American commandos with night vision goggles and handcuffs. Trump watched the entire operation live. "I watched it literally like I was watching a television show," he said. "If you would have seen the speed, the violence, it was an amazing thing. There's no other country on earth that could do such a maneuver. 0 American deaths, only minor injuries when 1 helicopter took fire. The most protected man in Venezuela, surrounded by an entire military, captured in less than 30 minutes. This wasn't just military superiority. This was inside help. This was betrayal." Venezuelan opposition sources immediately told Sky News what everyone was thinking, but nobody wanted to say. This was a negotiated exit. Translation: someone in the Venezuelan command structure made a deal. Someone gave the Americans the intelligence they needed. Someone turned off the radar. Someone disabled the air defense systems. Someone opened the door. And now those people are probably sitting in safe houses in Miami, waiting for their $50 million to clear into offshore accounts, while their former commander sits in handcuffs aboard the USS Iwo Jima, heading to a New York courtroom. Venezuela's Vice President Delcy Rodriguez went on state television hours after the operation, her voice shaking. "We do not know the whereabouts of President Nicolas Maduro and First Lady Cilia Flores. We demand proof of life." Even she doesn't know what happened. Even she was left in the dark. The Venezuelan government has lost its president, and its own vice president has to go on television begging America for confirmation that he's still alive. This is what the fall of a regime looks like. Not tanks in the streets, not a popular uprising, just a phone call, a deal, a betrayal, and a helicopter in the night. But let's be clear about what this operation was really about. Trump didn't go through all this trouble because of cocaine. He went through this trouble because of oil. Venezuela has the world's largest proven oil reserves, 303 billion barrels. That's more than Saudi Arabia's 268 billion, more than Iraq's 145 billion, more than Iran's 157 billion. Venezuela sits on an ocean of oil. And for 2 decades, it's been under socialist control, sold to China and Russia instead of American companies. Trump made this explicit at his Mar-a-Lago press conference. He didn't even try to hide it. "We're going to run Venezuela until there's a safe transition," he said. "We will be very strongly involved in Venezuela's oil industry, not help Venezuela recover, not support Venezuelan democracy, run Venezuela, control Venezuela's oil. This is the Panama Playbook, updated for 2026. In December 1989, President George H.W. Bush ordered the invasion of Panama to capture General Manuel Noriega, also on drug trafficking charges, also accused of running a narco state. U.S. forces stormed Panama City with 27,000 troops. Noriega hid in the Vatican embassy, then surrendered in January 1990. He was flown to Florida, tried in federal court, and convicted. The official reason, drugs. The real reason, control of the Panama Canal. Noriega had become too independent, too unpredictable. The U.S. needed a government in Panama that would protect American interests in the canal, so they invented a legal pretext, drug charges, launched a military operation, and installed a friendly government. The pattern is identical with Venezuela, just with better technology and a bigger prize, drug indictments, economic pressure, military buildup, surgical strike, regime change, U.S. control of strategic resources. 35 years later, same playbook, different country. The legal justification for all of this is thin at best. Multiple U.S. senators from both parties are asking whether Trump had constitutional authority to launch military strikes inside Venezuela without congressional approval. Democratic Senator Brian Schatz warned the United States has no vital national interests in Venezuela to justify war. Even Republican Senator Mike Lee initially said he looked forward to learning what could constitutionally justify the strikes. But after a phone call with Secretary of State Marco Rubio, Lee changed his tune. This action likely falls under the president's inherent authority under Article 2 of the Constitution to protect U.S. personnel from an actual or imminent attack. What attack? What U.S. personnel were under imminent threat? The administration hasn't said. They don't need to. Maduro is in handcuffs, Venezuela is in chaos, and American oil companies are about to get very, very rich. Russia immediately condemned the operation as armed aggression and demanded an emergency UN Security Council meeting. China called it a violation of international law. Iran warned of dangerous precedents. The UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres expressed deep alarm, saying the operation constitutes a dangerous precedent and emphasized the importance of respecting international law. But Trump doesn't care. His critics are weak, stupid people, he told Fox News. They're trying to save themselves from almost destroying our country. To his supporters, this is strength. This is America putting its interests first. This is what happens when you mess with the United States. You end up in handcuffs on a Navy ship. To the rest of the world, this looks like something else entirely. A superpower ignoring international law, invading a sovereign nation, kidnapping its leader, and installing a puppet government to control natural resources. This is textbook imperialism, dressed up in legal language about drug trafficking. Watch what happens next. Opposition leader Maria Corina Machado is already declaring victory, saying Edmundo Gonzalez, who supposedly won the 2024 presidential election before Maduro rigged it, is the legitimate president and should immediately assume power. But Trump made clear, we're going to run Venezuela. Not Gonzalez, not the opposition, the United States. American officials will oversee Venezuelan oil production. American companies will get licenses to operate in Venezuelan fields. American interests will determine Venezuela's future. China and Russia, which together hold billions in Venezuelan debt and have invested heavily in Venezuelan oil infrastructure, are about to lose everything. Watch how fast Venezuela's oil contracts with Beijing and Moscow get cancelled. Watch how quickly American energy companies move in to help restore production. Watch how democracy and freedom translate into American energy security. This operation has implications far beyond Venezuela. Every socialist government in Latin America is watching. Every leader who defies Washington is taking notes. The message is clear. You can have Chinese investment, Russian weapons, and anti-American rhetoric, but if you push too far, if you threaten American interests too directly, you might wake up one night with Delta Force in your bedroom. Cuba is watching. Nicaragua is watching. Bolivia is watching. They're all asking the same question. Which of our generals is on CIA payroll? Who can we trust? Who's going to sell us out for $50 million? This is the new face of American power in the 21st century. You don't need 100,000 troops and a decade-long occupation. You just need special operations forces, a few inside men, control of the global financial system, and a willingness to ignore international law. Venezuela fell in one night because someone inside opened the gate. Maduro trusted his generals. His generals trusted American money. And now Venezuela's oil belongs to Washington. The mainstream media will show you explosions and helicopters. They'll talk about drug cartels and narco-terrorism. They'll interview experts about the legal justification and the constitutional questions, but we're telling you the real story. This was a negotiated betrayal. This was generals selling out their commander for $50 million. This was Trump using drug charges as a pretext to seize control of the world's largest oil reserve. Empires don't fall because of military defeats. They fall because someone inside decides the price is right. Maduro learned that lesson at 2 a.m. on January 3rd, 2026. When American commandos walked through his fortress defenses like they owned the place, because someone had already sold them the keys. What do you think? Was this a legitimate counter-narcotics operation? Or is this the beginning of a new era of American intervention in Latin America? Which Venezuelan generals sold out Maduro? And what happens when China demands the UN condemn this as illegal? Let's discuss in the comments. Stay with the Static Dispatch for the truth behind the headlines.